Anderson Cooper was determined that day to tell Meghan Markle the truth with CNN journalistic severity. The confrontation that followed forced the former royal to flee the studio in humiliation. The CNN This Morning studio gleamed under its signature bright lighting as crew members made final adjustments for what was scheduled to be another high-profile celebrity interview. The sleek, modern set with its distinctive red, white, and blue color scheme had become synonymous with serious journalism and uncompromising news coverage since the network's founding. Today, however, would test those journalistic principles in ways that would surprise everyone in the building. Anderson Cooper sat at the anchor desk, methodically reviewing his research notes with the analytical intensity that had made him one of television's most respected journalists. His silver hair caught the studio lights as he studied documents with the same rigorous attention he had once brought to covering wars, natural disasters, and political scandals around the world. This interview represented something different for him, an opportunity to apply hard news standards to a celebrity who had spent years carefully managing her public narrative. His preparation had been exhaustive, reflecting the same thoroughness that had earned him multiple Emmy Awards and a Peabody. Research folders lay meticulously organized across his desk, timeline analyses, court documents, contradictory statement comparisons, and detailed fact-checks spanning several years of public appearances. This wasn't going to be another promotional softball interview. This was going to be journalism in its purest form, applied to someone who had grown accustomed to sympathetic treatment from entertainment media. The production team moved with the precision that had become synonymous with CNN's reputation for breaking news and investigative reporting. But there was an underlying tension in the air that veteran news professionals learned to recognize, the feeling that a routine interview might suddenly transform into something far more significant and potentially explosive. At exactly 9:45 a.m., a black Cadillac Escalade with heavily tinted windows pulled up to the CNN Center in New York. Meghan Markle emerged wearing an impeccably tailored navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, her appearance carefully calculated to project both authority and accessibility for the news environment. Her smile was confident as she acknowledged the small crowd of photographers and news crews who had gathered, though those familiar with stress indicators might have noticed a slight tension in her jaw that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with appearing on hard news television. Her entourage was notably more substantial than typical for news interviews: a senior publicist, a legal advisor, a media consultant, and 2 assistants. The presence of legal counsel for what was ostensibly a promotional appearance suggested either excessive caution or awareness that challenging questions might arise from a journalist of Anderson's caliber. The green room provided temporary sanctuary from the intense atmosphere of live news production. Meghan sat in a leather chair, sipping coffee from a CNN-branded mug while her team conducted final strategy sessions. They had spent considerable time preparing for this appearance, knowing that appearing on CNN represented a different level of scrutiny than entertainment programming. Anderson Cooper's reputation for incisive questioning and fact-based journalism was well established, and everyone understood the stakes. 15 minutes to air, a production assistant announced, and Meghan felt that familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that accompanied high-stakes television appearances. She had specifically requested this CNN appearance as part of her strategy to be taken more seriously as a public figure and advocate. The network's prestige and Anderson's reputation would lend credibility to her messaging, or so she believed. Her phone buzzed with final encouragement from her advisors, each message reinforcing the talking points they had practiced extensively. The messages brought a confident smile to her face, strengthening her belief that her media experience and careful preparation would carry her through any challenging moments that might arise. The walk from the green room to the studio felt different from her usual entertainment television experiences. The corridors of CNN carried an atmosphere of serious journalism and breaking news rather than celebrity promotion, and the staff members she encountered seemed more focused on information gathering than on making guests feel comfortable. This should have been a warning sign, but Meghan's confidence in her own narrative management skills blinded her to the reality of what she was walking into. Anderson Cooper stood to greet her as she entered the studio, his handshake firm and his smile professional but carrying the slight edge of journalistic curiosity that should have immediately activated her defensive systems. "Meghan, thank you for joining us this morning. I'm looking forward to a substantive conversation." "Thank you for having me, Anderson," she replied, her voice carrying that carefully modulated tone she had perfected, confident but not arrogant, warm but appropriately serious for the news environment. "I'm excited to discuss some important issues and share updates on my work." The pre-interview interaction was notably more businesslike than Meghan's usual television experiences. Instead of the extended small talk and ego-stroking compliments she had grown accustomed to, Anderson moved efficiently through the necessary logistics while maintaining the professional distance that characterized serious journalism. This difference in approach should have alerted her to the level of scrutiny she was about to face. 2 minutes to live, the floor director announced, and everyone took their positions. Meghan settled into the guest chair with practiced confidence, adjusting her blazer and crossing her legs in a way that projected both authority and accessibility. A graphic displaying her name and title appeared on the monitor behind them, though something about Anderson's continued review of his research notes suggested that her royal designation might not protect her from difficult questions. The red recording lights blinked on, and suddenly they were broadcasting live to millions of homes across America and around the world. "Good morning, and welcome to CNN This Morning," Anderson began with his characteristic authority and directness. "I'm Anderson Cooper, and I'm joined today by Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, to discuss her ongoing advocacy work and recent public statements about media treatment and institutional accountability." "Meghan, welcome to CNN." "Good morning, Anderson. Thank you for having me," Meghan replied, her smile bright but slightly more restrained than during entertainment appearances. "It's an honor to be here discussing these important issues." Anderson leaned forward with the focused attention that had made him one of journalism's most effective interviewers. "You've been quite vocal recently about the importance of accountability and truth-telling, particularly regarding institutions that you feel haven't lived up to their responsibilities. I'd like to explore that theme with you today." It seemed like a reasonable opening, and Meghan launched into well-rehearsed talking points about the importance of holding powerful institutions accountable and the responsibility that comes with public platforms. Her responses were articulate and emotionally resonant, hitting familiar notes about justice, transparency, and the need for systemic change. For the first 10 minutes, everything proceeded within the parameters of serious but respectful journalism. Anderson asked thoughtful questions about her advocacy work, her perspective on media responsibility, and her vision for positive change. Meghan felt herself settling into a comfortable rhythm, believing that her preparation and messaging discipline were serving her well. But then Anderson's tone shifted in a way that was subtle yet unmistakable to anyone familiar with his interviewing style. His posture straightened slightly, and his questions took on the prosecutorial edge that had made him legendary during his 60 Minutes days. "Meghan," he said, setting aside his prepared questions and looking directly at her with the focused intensity that had intimidated world leaders and corporate executives, "you talk frequently about accountability and truth-telling. But I want to ask you about some specific instances where your own public statements appear to contradict documented facts." The shift in approach immediately activated every defensive mechanism Meghan had developed over years of media training. Her smile became more forced, though she maintained her composed exterior. "I'm not sure what you mean, Anderson. I've always strived to be truthful in my public communications." Anderson's response revealed the depth of his preparation and the seriousness of his journalistic intent. "Let's examine some specifics. In your interview with Oprah Winfrey, you made several claims about your experiences that have since been contradicted by documented evidence and multiple corroborating sources. How do you reconcile those discrepancies?" The question landed with the force of a precision strike, and Meghan's carefully maintained composure began to show cracks. "I think you're taking things out of context, Anderson. Complex personal situations can't always be reduced to simple facts and figures." "But we're not talking about complex personal situations," Anderson replied with the relentless precision that had made him one of journalism's most feared interviewers. "We're talking about specific, verifiable claims. For example, your statement about being married 3 days before the public ceremony. The Archbishop of Canterbury later clarified that no legal marriage took place. That's not a matter of context, that's a factual inaccuracy." Meghan's hands, which had been resting confidently in her lap, began to fidget with her wedding ring as her stress level increased. "That was about the spiritual significance of our private commitment, not the legal technicalities." Anderson's expression remained professionally neutral, but his follow-up questions revealed his determination to pursue the truth. "But you didn't present it as spiritual significance. You presented it as fact. You said, and I quote, 'We called the Archbishop and we just said, this spectacle is for the world, but we want our union between us.' That implies a legal ceremony, doesn't it?" The studio atmosphere grew tense as viewers realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a hard news interview being applied to someone who had grown accustomed to entertainment-level scrutiny. Meghan's breathing became more labored as she struggled to respond without contradicting her previous statements. "I think you're parsing words to create controversy where none exists," she said, her voice carrying a defensive edge that hadn't been there at the beginning of the interview. Anderson leaned back slightly, studying her with the same analytical intensity he had once brought to covering international conflicts. "I'm not parsing words, Meghan. I'm fact-checking statements that were broadcast to global audiences and have influenced public discourse. That's what journalists do." "But this isn't a deposition," Meghan protested, her composure beginning to unravel more visibly. "This is supposed to be a conversation about important issues, not some kind of interrogation about every word I've ever spoken." Anderson's response was devastating in its simplicity and authority. When public figures make statements that affect public discourse and potentially damage other people's reputations, those statements become legitimate subjects for journalistic scrutiny. You can't selectively claim immunity from fact-checking. Something inside Meghan began to crack under the sustained pressure of professional journalism applied to her carefully constructed narratives. Her voice rose just enough to be noticeable as she responded, "You're trying to discredit me by focusing on minor inconsistencies instead of addressing the substantive issues I've raised." "Minor inconsistencies?" Anderson's voice carried a note of genuine surprise. "Meghan, you've made public allegations about racism, financial abandonment, and institutional cruelty. These aren't minor issues. They're serious accusations that deserve serious scrutiny." "Of course they're serious." Meghan's emotional control was slipping more obviously now. "That's exactly why I've spoken out about them. People deserve to know the truth." Anderson's next question struck at the heart of the credibility crisis that had been building throughout the interview. "But which truth, Meghan? Because the pattern we're seeing is that your version of events often differs significantly from documented facts and the accounts of other people who were present for the same situations." The question hung in the air like an indictment that couldn't be deflected or explained away. Meghan's face flushed red as she struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further undermine her position. "You're questioning my integrity," she said finally, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "I'm questioning your accuracy," Anderson corrected with clinical precision. "And there's an important distinction between the two." Meghan shot to her feet so suddenly that her chair rolled backward, her professional composure completely abandoned. "This is outrageous. I came here to have a serious discussion about accountability, and you're treating me like a criminal." Anderson remained seated, looking up at her with the calm authority that had made him one of journalism's most respected figures. "I'm treating you like a public figure who has made public statements that deserve public scrutiny. That's how democracy works." "Democracy?" Meghan's voice had risen to nearly a shout. "This isn't democracy, this is a hit job. You invited me here under false pretenses to humiliate me on national television." Anderson's response carried the weight of decades of serious journalism. "I invited you here to answer questions about statements you've made voluntarily to global audiences. If answering those questions feels like humiliation, perhaps you should consider whether the statements were accurate in the first place." As Meghan grabbed her purse and turned toward the exit, Anderson delivered the line that would become the most quoted moment of the entire confrontation. "Meghan," he called out, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of America's most trusted journalists, "get serious. If you want to be taken seriously as a public figure and advocate, you need to be prepared to defend your statements with facts, not emotions." The words, "get serious," hit Meghan like a slap across the face. She stopped dead in her tracks, her entire body trembling with barely contained fury. For a moment, it looked like she might turn around and attempt to physically confront him. Instead, she pressed her hand to her mouth, shook her head in disgust, and stormed toward the exit. Her heels clicked frantically against the studio floor as she fled, the sound amplifying in the sudden silence that had fallen over the entire space. The cameras followed her until she disappeared through the backstage door, leaving behind a quiet so complete that even the season news production crew seemed stunned by what they had just witnessed. For several long moments, nobody moved. Anderson sat at his desk, adjusting his papers with the composure of someone who had simply completed another day of serious journalism. His expression showed neither satisfaction nor regret, only the professional resolve of a journalist who had asked the questions that needed to be asked. Finally, Anderson turned to face the camera with the authority that had made him a trusted figure in American journalism for decades. "When we return, we'll be discussing the importance of fact-based discourse in public debate and why accountability applies to everyone, regardless of their platform or status." As the show cut to commercial, the production team scrambled to process what had just occurred. Social media was already exploding with clips and analysis, and news organizations around the world were beginning to cover the story. The interview would be studied in journalism schools and media ethics courses for years to come. Meanwhile, somewhere in the CNN building, Meghan Markle was probably locked in a bathroom, trying to compose herself enough to face the inevitable media circus waiting outside. Her legal team was likely coordinating an emergency exit strategy while her publicists fielded calls from news organizations seeking comment on the dramatic confrontation. But the journalistic damage was irreversible. In less than 20 minutes, one of television's most respected news anchors had systematically exposed the gap between carefully crafted narratives and verifiable facts. He had applied the same rigorous standards to a celebrity that he had once applied to world leaders and war criminals, treating fame as no exemption from accountability. Whether you agreed with his methods or not, one thing was undeniable: Anderson Cooper had demonstrated that serious journalism could still exist in an era of manufactured narratives and strategic victimhood. His refusal to accept emotional manipulation in place of factual accuracy had created a moment that would be remembered as a masterclass in holding public figures accountable for their public statements. The truth, as Anderson had suggested, doesn't recognize titles, celebrity status, or carefully managed public relations campaigns. And sometimes, the most important service a journalist can provide is reminding everyone that getting serious about public discourse means getting serious about facts.